The clinking of silverware at Aurelia restaurant was the sound of old money. Waitress Clara Reed knew that sound well. She also knew the sound of entitlement, and it was sitting at table 7. Arthur Vance, a billionaire notorious for his temper, was holding court. Clara approached with a 5,000 bottle of wine, her hand steady, her face a mask of professional calm. A tiny, accidental splash. A moment of silence. And then Vance leaned in and hissed a string of vile, cutting insults at her in fluent, rapid-fire Arabic, unaware that the woman he was insulting had grown up speaking it. The scent of beeswax, old leather, and seared scallops hung heavy in the air at Aurelia. It was the most exclusive restaurant in the city, a place where whispered conversations could seal billion-dollar deals or topple political careers. For Clara Reed, it was just Tuesday. A double-shift Tuesday, which meant 14 hours of navigating fragile egos and balancing trays heavy with food she could never afford. Clara, at 24, possessed a poise that didn't belong in her starched black and white uniform. She moved between the tables with an economist's efficiency and a diplomat's grace, skills she'd learned in a life that felt like it belonged to someone else. Her dark hair was pulled back in a severe bun, and her eyes, though tired, missed nothing. Tonight, the nothing she couldn't miss was table 7. Arthur Vance. Even the name sounded like a slammed door. Vance was a titan of industry, a man who built his empire by crushing his competitors. He was dining with 3 guests. 2 of them, a younger man and woman named Mark and Sarah, looked like high-strung racehorses, laughing too loudly at his jokes and nodding vigorously at his pronouncements. They were his employees, clearly. The 3rd guest was the prize. Evelyn Shaw, the CEO of Shaw Global Logistics. She was older, impeccably dressed, and watched Vance with a cool, appraising neutrality that suggested she was immune to his bluster. Vance was clearly trying to impress her. And of course, the key to the entire Riyadh expansion, Vance boomed, slicing into a piece of steak, is understanding the local mindset. You can't just walk in speaking English and expect a deal. You have to show them you are one of them. Mark and Sarah nodded. "Incredible insight, Arthur," Mark said. Evelyn Shaw merely sipped her water. "And do you speak the language, Mr. Vance?" Vance preened. "Fluently. It's my secret weapon. You'd be amazed what you can say when people assume you're just another ignorant American." He chuckled, and his eyes scanned the room, landing on Clara as she approached with the wine. It was a 1989 Chateau Petrus, a bottle that cost more than Clara's rent for 3 months. She had presented the bottle. It had been approved. Now came the ritual of pouring. Mr. Benoit, the restaurant's obsequious manager, hovered nearby, his hands clasped so tightly his knuckles were white. He knew Vance's reputation. Clara tilted the bottle, the dark red liquid flowing in a perfect silent stream into Vance's glass. She was a professional. This was easy, until it wasn't. As she moved to the next glass, Mark, in his eagerness to agree with something Vance had just said, gestured wildly with his hand, his elbow connected hard with the base of the table. The jolt was sudden and violent. It was imperceptible to anyone else, but Clara felt it. A single, tiny drop of the priceless wine leaped from the neck of the bottle and landed squarely on the platinum cufflink on Arthur Vance's left wrist. Silence. Mark froze, his face draining of color. Sarah gasped and covered her mouth. Mr. Benoit looked as though he might faint. Clara herself didn't move. "My apologies, sir. Your associate." Vance slowly raised his hand, looking at the tiny red speck on the metal. He didn't look at Mark. He looked at Clara. He didn't yell. He didn't make a scene in English. That would have been too common for him. Instead, a slow, reptilian smile spread across his face. He leaned forward, confident that he was insulated by the secret weapon he had just been bragging about. In a low, guttural voice, he spoke in fluent, cutting Arabic. He didn't just complain about the wine. He insulted her. He called her a clumsy, worthless servant, fit only to clean the shoes of men like him. He insulted her mother for raising such an incompetent child. He used street-level curses that were breathtaking in their vitriol, all while smiling as if he were asking for more water. Mark and Sarah just stared, uncomprehending, but sensing the venom. Evelyn Shaw's eyes narrowed slightly, trying to pass the tone. Clara Reed stood perfectly still. The blood drained from her face, but not from fear. From rage. He hadn't just insulted her. He had insulted her family in a language she knew as well as her own, the language her father had read to her from. She held his gaze. Vance was still smiling, waiting for her to grovel in a language she supposedly didn't understand. Clara took a small, steadying breath. And then, in the hushed, expensive silence of Aurelia, she replied. Her voice was not loud, but it cut through the restaurant like a diamond. She spoke in flawless, formal Arabic, the educated, precise dialect of academics and diplomats, a stark contrast to the gutter talk he had used. "Sir," she said, her pronunciation perfect. Your associate, Mr. Daniels, struck the table. I will, however, retrieve a damp cloth for your cufflink at once. But such language is unnecessary. It dishonors this establishment, and it dishonors you. The effect was instantaneous. Vance's smile evaporated. His face went from smug to confused to a deep, mottled purple in the space of 3 seconds. He looked as if she had physically slapped him. Mark and Sarah stared, their jaws open. They had no idea what was said, only that a response had occurred. Mr. Benoit let out a small, wheezing sound. But the most important reaction came from Evelyn Shaw. She put her wine glass down. Her eyebrows shot up to her hairline, and a slow, astonished, and deeply impressed smile spread across her face. She looked from Clara to the sputtering Vance, and then back to Clara. The entire room was silent. Arthur Vance, the Titan, the polyglot, the master of the universe, had just been publicly checkmated by a waitress. The silence in the restaurant stretched, becoming heavy and brittle. Arthur Vance, for the first time in what was likely decades, was completely, utterly speechless. He was a man who controlled boardrooms, who made markets rise and fall with a single phone call. He had just been dressed down in his secret language by a 24-year-old server. He finally found his voice, and it was a roar. He switched back to English, his face a mask of incandescent rage. What did you just say to me?" Clara, her adrenaline surging, refused to break eye contact. She also switched to English, her voice remaining preternaturally calm. "I said I would get a cloth for your cufflink, sir." You speak Arabic?" Vance sputtered, as if the concept was impossible. "Yes, sir," Clara said, allowing a fraction of the ice in her veins to enter her voice. "I grew up in Beirut. My father was the bureau chief for the Times." The gasps from the adjacent tables were audible. This was no longer just a spilled wine incident. It was theatre. At the table, Sarah and Mark looked like they wanted to disappear into the upholstery. But Evelyn Shaw leaned forward, her expression one of pure, fascinated intrigue. "Beirut?" Evelyn said, her voice carrying clear as a bell. "My goodness, what a fascinating place to grow up. David Reed, perhaps? Your father?" Clara's composure almost broke. She was shocked. Yes, he was. "I knew his work," Evelyn said, nodding slowly. He was a man of great integrity. She then turned her cool gaze on Vance. "Which makes your comments to her just now, Mr. Vance, all the more disappointing." Vance finally exploded. The embarrassment had curdled into pure fury. He had been exposed. He had been made to look small, foolish, and cruel in front of the very client he was trying to sign. He had lost control, and he would make someone pay. "Benoit!" he bellowed, shoving his chair back. The entire restaurant flinched. Mr. Benoit scurried over, his face pale and slick with sweat. "Mr. Vance, sir. Please, on behalf of Aurelia, I am so deeply sorry." "Sorry?" Vance sneered. "You employ this insolent, this eavesdropper." "Sir, I assure you, I want her fired. Not tomorrow. Not in an hour. Now. Get her out of my sight. If I ever see her face again, I will personally ensure that every food critic in this city knows that Aurelia employs disrespectful, insubordinate staff. I will ruin this place." The threat hung in the air, thick and poisonous. Mr. Benoit looked at Clara, his eyes pleading. He was a man trapped between a rock and a corporate executioner. Clara knew what was coming. She had stood up for herself, and this was the price. But before Benoit could stammer out an apology and a firing, Evelyn Shaw calmly folded her napkin and placed it on the table. "Mr. Vance," she said, her voice quiet but commanding. "Please, it was clearly an accident. Your own associate caused it." She glanced at Mark, who flinched. "The young woman was nothing but professional until you insulted her and her family. Her response was, frankly, a model of restraint." Vance turned on her. "This doesn't concern you, Evelyn." "It does, actually," Evelyn replied, standing up. "It concerns me a great deal. I was considering a partnership with you, Arthur, a partnership that relies heavily on logistics and cultural nuance in the Middle East. You just demonstrated, in spectacular fashion, that you possess none. You use a language not to build bridges, but to plant mines. You just embarrassed yourself, and you're trying to fix it by ruining a young woman's life." She turned to her own team. "Mark? Sarah? We're leaving." "Evelyn, wait!" Vance said, panic momentarily replacing his anger. "Don't be dramatic. It was a misunderstanding." "The only misunderstanding," Evelyn said, looking him straight in the eye, "was my belief that you were a serious professional." She walked away from the table. As she passed Clara, she paused for 1/2 second. She didn't say a word, but her eyes conveyed a single, powerful message. Well done. Vance was left standing there, his face ashen, his dinner unfinished, his deal in flames. He turned to Benoit, his voice dropping to a lethal whisper. "She's gone. By the time I walk out that door, she is gone. Or I keep my promise." Mr. Benoit watched his most important client of the year walk out, then looked at Clara, his expression a mixture of terror and pity. "Clara," he stammered. "To the back. Please, just go to the back." Clara nodded, her head held high. She turned and walked away from the table, not looking back. She could feel the stares of every patron in the restaurant on her. She had won the battle, but she had just lost the war. The staff locker room at Aurelia smelled of bleach, old shoes, and microwave meals. It was a cramped, windowless box that served as the restaurant's nerve center. Clara sat on a hard plastic bench, her hands finally, violently, shaking. The adrenaline was fading, leaving behind a cold, hollow dread. She was fired. She was absolutely, unequivocally fired. Vance would make sure of it. She stared at her locker, at the dog-eared copy of international treaty law taped to the inside of the door. It seemed like a cruel joke. This wasn't the life Clara Reed was supposed to have. She was the daughter of David and Dr. Elena Reed, Her childhood was not one of back-alley restaurants and starched aprons. It was one of bustling souks in Cairo, quiet evenings on a balcony overlooking the Mediterranean in Beirut, and listening to her parents debate policy and history with diplomats, journalists, and poets. Her father, David, was a legendary correspondent, a man who believed in telling the truth. Her mother, Elena, was a brilliant historian who spoke 4 languages and taught at the American University. Clara had inherited her mother's linguistic gift and her father's iron will. She was fluent in English, French, and the complex, beautiful Arabic of the Levant. She had been the star of her class at Georgetown on a full scholarship, triple majoring in international relations and linguistics. She was going to be a diplomat. She was going to change the world. Then the world changed her. It happened in 3 brutal stages. First, her father died, not from a car bomb or a conflict, but from a sudden, shocking heart attack while on a brief trip back to London. He was 58. The light went out of their lives. Her mother, Elena, was a shadow of herself. She moved back to the States with Clara, but the grief consumed her. A year later, a diagnosis: pancreatic cancer. The fight was short, brutal, and expensive. When Eleanor Reed died, Clara, at 22, was left an orphan. And then the final blow. The lawyers. Her parents, brilliant as they were, had been journalists and academics, not financiers. Her father's pension was tangled. Her mother's medical bills had devoured their savings. The inheritance was a mountain of debt. The Georgetown scholarship was gone. Clara, the girl who had debated ambassadors, was suddenly and terrifyingly poor. She had one remaining family member, her younger brother, Leo, who was just starting his sophomore year at a state college. Clara made a promise. She would not let him drop out. She would not let this family tragedy derail 2 lives. So, she put her dreams in a box. She sold her parents' few remaining assets, found a tiny studio apartment, and took the first job that could pay the bills, waitressing at Aurelia. For 2 years, she had been pouring wine for men like Arthur Vance, smiling through their condescending remarks, swallowing her pride, and sending every spare dollar to Leo for his tuition and books. The encounter tonight hadn't just been about rudeness, it was personal. Vance's specific, targeted insults, calling her worthless and mocking her family, were a grotesque parody of the respect and honor her parents had built their lives around. When she had answered him in Arabic, she wasn't just defending herself. She was defending David and Eleanor Reed. A knock on the door made her jump. It was Mr. Benoit. He looked tired and old. "Clara," he said, avoiding her eyes. He's gone." "I know," Clara said softly. "He called the owner. From his car. Clara, I have no choice. You're my best employee. You're professional. You're brilliant. You're family. But he's Arthur Vance. The owners are terrified. I have to." "I understand, Mr. Benoit," Clara said, standing up. "You don't have to say it. Please take your final paycheck," he said, pushing an envelope into her hand. I added 2 weeks' severance from my own pocket. Don't tell the owners." Clara's throat tightened. "Thank you, Robert." She cleaned out her locker. The textbook, a spare apron, a photo of her and Leo laughing in Central Park. It all fit in her backpack. She walked out the back door, into the alley. The reality hit her like a physical blow. Rent was due in a week. Leo's next tuition payment was in a month. She had just lost her job, and with a reference from Aurelia now impossible, Vance would poison that well too, she would be lucky to get a job at a diner. She sat on the curb, the smell of garlic and garbage in the air, and for the first time in 2 years, Clara Reed put her head in her hands and allowed herself to cry. Clara must have sat in that alley for 20 minutes, the cold of the pavement seeping through her thin black pants. The wave of despair was overwhelming. She had done the right thing, the proud thing, and the system had punished her for it. Her father's integrity, her mother's grace. What good were they if they left you unemployed and terrified? She finally stood up, wiping her eyes. Crying wouldn't pay the rent. She had to think. She had to make a plan. She started the long walk to the subway, her mind racing. Maybe she could find a tutoring job. French? Arabic? But those were gig work, not enough to cover the bills. She felt the hollow dread expanding in her chest. As she turned the corner onto the main street, a long black sedan pulled up beside her, its engine a low, expensive hum. The back window glided down. "Miss Reed." Clara stopped, her heart hammering. It was Evelyn Shaw. "Get in," Evelyn said. It wasn't a request. Clara hesitated. She was in her work uniform, her face was stained with tears, and she was standing on a street corner. "Mum, Get in the car, Clara. It's cold." Clara opened the door and slid into the impossibly plush leather interior. The car smelled faintly of roses and old paper. Evelyn Shaw was looking at her. Not with pity, but with that same assessing, intelligent gaze from the restaurant. "Where do you live?" Evelyn asked. Clara told her the subway stop. Evelyn relayed it to the driver, who nodded and pulled smoothly into traffic. They sat in silence for a moment. Clara didn't know what to say. "Thank you for what you did. In there. You didn't have to." "Yes, I did," Evelyn said simply. "I don't abide bullies, and I certainly don't do business with fools who sabotage their own deals because of a fragile ego." He made them fire me," Clara said, the words tasting like ash. "I know," Evelyn said. "I expected he would. He's a predictable man." "So, why are you here?" Evelyn turned in her seat. "Ms. Reed, what I saw tonight was remarkable. Poise under pressure, grace in the face of astonishing vulgarity. You handled a man who terrifies entire boards of directors, and you did it without raising your voice. That is a skill. It's a rare and valuable one." Clara just stared. "My dinner with Mr. Vance was not social," Evelyn continued. "We are competitors for a massive infrastructure deal in the Gulf. Specifically, a joint project with Emirati and Saudi sovereign wealth funds. Vance thought his market Arabic, let's call it, was his ace. He was wrong. It's a liability." She reached into her briefcase and pulled out a simple, cream-colored business card. She handed it to Clara. "Evelyn Shaw, CEO, Shaw Global Logistics." "My guess," Evelyn said, "is that your Arabic is better than his. He was using crude slang. You were speaking with distinction. Am I correct?" Yes. I grew up in Beirut. My parents, well, you know about my father. My mother was a historian. I was studying international relations at Georgetown before you had to stop," Evelyn finished for her. Clara nodded, stunned she knew. "I had my assistant do a quick search on David Reed Beirut daughter while I was in the powder room. I suspected there was a story there. A Georgetown student doesn't just stop to become a waitress. Life happens." The car pulled up to Clara's subway stop. The contrast between the sleek, warm car and the grimy, loud station entrance was jarring. "Clara," Evelyn said, her voice softening for the first time. "I'm not hiring you out of pity. I'm offering you an opportunity. I need people on my team who don't just speak a language, but who understand a culture. I need people who understand that in the Middle East, as in all high-level business, respect and face are not soft skills. They are the currency. Vance just proved he's bankrupt." She tapped the business card in Clara's hand. "That's my private email address. Send me your resume. What's left of it? Send me your transcripts from Georgetown. Send me a one-page summary of what you thought Arthur Vance was trying to accomplish tonight, and why his approach failed. You're serious? Clara whispered. I am never not serious, Miss Reed. I have an office in Dubai, one in Riyadh, and headquarters here. I need smart, resilient people. You look like one to me. Don't prove me wrong. The driver opened the door. Clara, clutching the card, stepped out onto the cold street. Thank you, Ms. Shaw. I won't. The door closed, and the sedan disappeared into the flow of traffic. Clara looked down at the embossed card in her hand. It felt heavier than a brick. It wasn't just a job offer. It was a lifeline. It was a way back to the life she had lost. Clara didn't sleep. The moment she got back to her tiny, cold studio apartment, she turned on her aging laptop. The fear of unemployment was still a cold knot in her stomach, but it was now overlaid with a sharp, electric hum of hope. She looked at her resume. It was a pathetic document. Waitress, Aurelia, 2023, present. Barista, The Coffee Bean, 2023. Before that, a dazzling list of academic achievements and internships that ended abruptly 2 years ago. It looked like the resume of a brilliant failure. She took a deep breath. What Evelyn Shaw saw tonight wasn't on this paper. She spent 3 hours writing the one-page summary. She poured every ounce of her academic training and her lived experience into it. She analyzed Vance's alpha male posturing, his critical mistake of using insults instead of charm, his catastrophic failure to read the room, specifically Evelyn herself. She contrasted it with the principles of adab, etiquette, and karam, generosity, that truly governed high-level business in the Gulf. She used her father's journalistic clarity and her mother's academic precision. At 4:15 a.m., she attached the summary, her resume, and her unofficial transcripts. She sent the email to the private address. She stared at the sent confirmation for a full minute, her heart pounding. She fell into a restless sleep for 2 hours, waking up to the grey light of dawn and the immediate, crushing anxiety. Was it a dream? Was she just a drunk CEO's pity project? Her phone buzzed at 9:02 a.m., an email, not from Evelyn, but from her executive assistant. Subject: Shaw Global Logistics, Miss Reed. Ms. Shaw has reviewed your materials. Please be at our headquarters, 1400 Park Avenue, at 11:00 a.m. today, for a formal interview. A car will be at your address at 10:15. Regards, Amanda. West Clara stared at the screen. A car. She leaped out of bed. She had one good suit, a dark grey wool blend she had bought at a thrift store for her mother's funeral. It would have to do. At 10:15, a black car, identical to Evelyn's, was waiting. Clara walked out, her old suit pressed, her hair in a tight bun, her father's old leather satchel over her shoulder. She felt like she was marching into battle. The Shaw Global building was a spear of glass and steel. The lobby was a vast expanse of white marble and hushed efficiency. Her name was on the list. A silent security guard badged her up to the 60th floor. She was shown into an office that was larger than her entire apartment, with a glass wall overlooking Central Park. Evelyn Shaw was not behind her desk. She was standing by the window, hands clasped behind her back. Your analysis was excellent, Miss Reed, Evelyn said, not turning around. You correctly identified that Arthur wasn't just trying to impress me. He was trying to intimidate me. He was marking his territory. He assumed that as a woman, I would be impressed by his vulgar display of power. She turned. He miscalculated. And you called him on it in a way that cost him nothing but his own dignity. He, in turn, tried to cost you your livelihood. Evelyn sat behind her massive, clean desk. I am not a philanthropist, Clara. I'm a capitalist. I see potential. I invest. I believe you have potential. She slid a file across the desk. The role is junior analyst, cultural liaison, on my executive team. You will report directly to my chief of staff. You will be in every meeting related to the Gulf expansion project. You will analyze proposals, you will prep me for negotiations, and you will tell me when men like Arthur Vance are, to put it plainly, full of it. Clara opened the file. It was an offer letter. She looked at the salary. Her vision swam. It was not triple her Aurelia salary. It was 5 times that, plus full benefits, and a final line item, tuition reimbursement program for completion of relevant degree. Clara looked up, her eyes stinging. Ms. Shaw, I don't know what to say. Say yes, Evelyn said, a small smile playing on her lips. I already had HR draw up your access card. Your new boss, Robert Stone, is expecting you for onboarding at 1 p.m. We have a lot of work to do. Arthur Vance may be wounded, but he's not dead. He's still competing for that deal, and I intend to win it. Yes, Clara said, her voice thick with emotion, but her gaze steady. Yes, absolutely. Thank you. I won't let you down. I know, Evelyn said. Now go. Amanda will get you your credentials. Welcome to Shaw Global. Clara walked out of the office, her legs shaking. She went to the 60th floor women's restroom, a cavern of marble and brushed steel. She stood in front of the mirror, looking at her own reflection. The tired waitress in the cheap suit was gone. In her place was a woman she hadn't seen in 2 years. She was Clara Reed, daughter of David and Eleanor. And she was back. The first few months at Shaw Global were a blur. Clara felt like she'd been thrown from a raft into the deep end of the ocean. The language of the business world, EBITDA, capex, logistical regressions, was foreign, but she attacked it with the same ferocity she had once reserved for her political science textbooks. She was the first one in the office and the last one to leave, often eating dinner at her desk, poring over shipping lane analytics and Emirati investment law. Her new boss, Robert Stone, the chief of staff, was a different kind of challenge. He was a sharp, numbers-first man in his late 40s who had worked his way up from the mailroom. He was impeccably professional, but he viewed Clara with a poorly concealed skepticism. In his eyes, she was Evelyn's pet project, a vanity hire. He hadn't been in the restaurant that night. All he knew was that the CEO had plucked a waitress from obscurity and given her a high-level analyst position. He didn't bully her. Instead, he tried to drown her. Clara, I need a full competitive analysis of Vance Industries' last 5 years of Mideast acquisitions, he'd say at 4 p.m. on a Friday. Need it by Monday. Clara, the Riyadh team needs a cultural brief on new gift-giving protocols for Ramadan. This is for the Royal Commission, so it can't be wrong. He was testing her, waiting for her to fail, waiting for her to prove she was just a girl with a party trick. Clara didn't fail. She didn't complain. She just did the work. She stayed up all weekend, fueled by coffee and the terror of losing this new life. Her analysis of Vance's acquisitions was so thorough, noting that he always overpaid and then cut corners on local labor, creating resentment, that Robert Stone had no choice but to forward it to Evelyn with a single, grudging comment. Good work. Her brief on Ramadan protocols was so nuanced, including region-specific details her colleagues had never heard of, that the Riyadh team sent back a note of glowing praise. Clara, meanwhile, was changing. She used her first paycheck to buy 2 more suits, a new laptop, and a plane ticket for her brother, Leo, to visit for Christmas. She re-enrolled at Georgetown, taking night classes online. The dark circles under her eyes remained, But they were no longer from despair. They were from ambition. She also became indispensable to Evelyn. In high-stakes video calls with their Gulf partners, Clara would sit just off camera. A partner would say something in Arabic, a nuanced phrase that the official translator would botch. Clara would write a note, slide it to Evelyn. Evelyn would then say, "Mr. Al-Falasi, if I may, I sense your concern is not with the timeline, but with the training of the local staff. Am I correct?" The partner on the screen would look stunned, then pleased. "Yes, Ms. Shaw, precisely." After one such meeting, Evelyn hung up and looked at Clara. "Robert thinks I hired you because you're a good story, Clara. He's wrong. I hired you because you're a good listener. It's a skill that's going extinct." The real test came 6 months after she was hired. The Gulf infrastructure deal, the same one Vance had been pitching, was reaching its climax. The sovereign wealth fund, managed by a massive American private equity firm, had narrowed it down to 2 finalists, Vance Industries and Shaw Global. The final presentation was to be held not in the Gulf, but in New York. The man who would make the final decision was the fund's legendary, reclusive chairman, Mr. Alistair Finch. Robert Stone briefed the team. Finch is old money. Boarding schools, Ivy League, the works. He's a numbers guy. He doesn't care about cultural nuance. He cares about ROI. So, Clara, with all due respect, this is a spreadsheet meeting. Your linguistic skills won't be in play. Finch is as American as apple pie. Clara, however, was already deep in her research. "Robert," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "I'm not sure that's entirely accurate. I was reading his biography. Finch's father was president of Aramco in the 1970s. Alistair Finch didn't just visit Saudi Arabia. He spent his first 15 years living in a compound in Dhahran. He went to school with—" Robert held up a hand. "That's interesting, Clara. But it's trivia. Let's stick to the numbers." "He's an American businessman," Clara pressed. "But Robert, that's my point. He's an American businessman who grew up there. He won't just know the language, he'll know the culture. He'll know if we're faking it. And I promise you, Arthur Vance will be faking it." Robert sighed. "Fine. Prepare a 1-sheet on cultural points. But the main pitch will be my numbers." Clara nodded. She knew a 1-sheet wouldn't be enough. This wasn't a spreadsheet meeting. It was a test. And she knew, with a chilling certainty, that Arthur Vance was going to fail it. The meeting room was on the 80th floor of a downtown skyscraper, a sterile, silent space of black marble and smoked glass, clearly designed to make titans of industry feel small. The view over the city was dizzying, absolute. On one side of a massive reflective black table sat Alistair Finch and his 2 vice presidents. Finch, in his late 60s, had a face that looked like it had been carved from granite and a stillness that was deeply unsettling. He was a man who had heard every lie ever spoken and was bored by all of them. His VPs were silent, their hands folded, existing only as extensions of their boss. On the other side sat the Shaw Global team, Evelyn Shaw exuding a calm, focused energy. Robert Stone, who, despite his senior position, was visibly nervous, his papers arranged in an overly precise stack, and Clara Reed, her hands resting calmly on her closed laptop, her posture straight, her gaze steady. She was no longer a waitress, she was an analyst, and she was here to fight. The door hissed open, and the final group entered, 5 minutes late, a classic power move. Arthur Vance burst in, not walked. He was a whirlwind of expensive cologne and loud, false bonhomie. He was flanked by his 2 associates, Mark and Sarah, who looked just as nervous as they had at the restaurant. "Alistair, good to see you, good to see you," Vance boomed, striding over to shake Finch's unmoving hand. "Sorry we're late. Traffic was a nightmare." Finch merely nodded. "Mr. Vance, please, be seated." Vance sat, radiating an aggressive confidence. He nodded curtly at Evelyn. "Evelyn?" Then his eyes scanned her team. He glanced at Robert, then at Clara. He stopped. His eyes slid right past her, then snapped back, narrowing in disbelief. He saw the face of the waitress from Aurelia, but she was in an impeccably tailored navy blue suit, her hair in an elegant twist, a leather-bound portfolio in front of her. The recognition clicked, and his disbelief curdled into a sneer of pure, mocking contempt. "Well, well," he said, his voice loud in the tomb-like silence of the room. "Look at this. They've certainly upgraded the uniform. Serving coffee for the big table now, are we? What was it? Clara?" Robert Stone tensed, his face flushing with anger. Mark and Sarah, on Vance's team, looked at the floor, mortified. Evelyn Shaw's face remained passive, but her hand tightened, just slightly, on the pen she was holding. Clara felt a jolt, a flash of the alley, the cold, the despair. But it lasted only a second. She had been preparing for this. She had visualized this moment 100 times. She did not flush. She did not look away. She met his gaze with a cool, level stare that held no fear at all. "Mr. Vance," she said, her voice clear and professional. "Good to see you again." Before Vance could retort, Evelyn Shaw cut in, her voice like ice. "Ms. Reed is my senior strategic analyst and cultural advisor, Arthur. I'd advise you to pay attention. You might learn something." Vance's sneer faltered, replaced by a momentary confusion. Senior analyst. He clearly thought it was some kind of joke, a diversity hire, a pity case. He scoffed, turning back to Finch. "Whatever you say, Evelyn. Let's get to it, shall we?" Alistair Finch cleared his throat, a sound like gravel. "Mr. Vance, your presentation is first." Vance launched into his pitch. It was a bulldozer of a presentation, all flash, all ego. It was about him. "I've spent years in the Gulf," he boasted. "I know the players. I speak the language." He showed slides of himself shaking hands with various regional managers, slick graphics of skyscrapers, and then he started to pepper his speech with clumsy, badly pronounced Arabic. "As they say, inshallah, this project will be a success," he said, using the word incorrectly as a guarantee rather than a hope. He then tried to quote a proverb about partnership, but got it so wrong he accidentally said something closer to, "A good friend will pay you what he owes." Clara watched Alistair Finch. The man's expression didn't change, but she saw it. A tiny, fractional tightening at the corner of his mouth. He was being insulted. Vance wasn't just being clumsy, he was being patronizing, assuming no one in the room would know the difference. Vance, oblivious, mistook the cold silence for rapt attention. He was on a roll. Believing he had proven his insider status, he made his fatal mistake. He leaned back in his chair, exuding smugness, and turned to his associate, Mark. In the same low, conspiratorial, gutter Arabic he had used at the restaurant, he said, "This old fossil is stiff as a board, but don't worry, he just wants the money. He's a typical greedy American. He thinks money is the only god." Clara froze. Her blood ran cold. She saw Mark give a nervous, obsequious snicker. She dared to glance at Alistair Finch. The man was looking down at his notepad, his hand holding a pen, perfectly still. He'd heard. He'd heard and understood every single poisonous word. He was just waiting. Vance finished his presentation with a flourish. "We can break ground in 6 months. No one can match our speed. Period." Finch nodded slowly. "Thank you, Mr. Vance." "Ms. Shaw." It was their turn. Robert Stone, clearly shaken by Vance's theatrics, stood up. He launched into his spreadsheet-heavy presentation. It was solid, well-researched, full of Q3 projections and logistical synergies. But it was completely dry. It had no soul. It was exactly the kind of numbers-only pitch Vance had just mocked. Clara saw Finch subtly check his watch. He was disengaged. He was bored. The deal was slipping through their fingers. Robert finished and sat down to a polite, cold silence. The deal was dead. The silence in the room stretched. Robert looked defeated. Evelyn Shaw looked at Robert, then she turned her head, just slightly, and looked at Clara. It wasn't a command. It was permission. Your move. Clara felt the entire weight of the room, of the deal, of her new life, settle on her shoulders. She stood up. Her heart was hammering against her ribs, but her voice was clear. "Mr. Finch," she began in English, "Mr. Stone has shown you the what of our proposal. Our numbers are sound, our logistics are superior, and our projections are, unlike our competitors, realistic." Vance scoffed. "Sentiment doesn't build skyscrapers, sweetheart." This was the opening. Clara turned her gaze on Vance, just for a second. "You're right, Mr. Vance. Sentiment doesn't. Respect does." She turned back to Finch, and her entire demeanor changed. She was no longer just an analyst. She was the daughter of David and Eleanor Reed. "Mr. Finch, I grew up in Beirut. My father was a journalist there. And he taught me that when you build in the Middle East, you're not just building on sand. You're building on centuries of culture. You are a guest. And a good guest shows respect." She saw a flicker in Finch's eyes. Now, she took the gamble. She switched to the same formal, beautiful, academic Arabic she had learned as a child, the dialect of the educated, of the old families. "Mr. Vance believes you are an old fossil who only worships money," she said, using Vance's exact insulting words. The colour drained from Vance's face. He looked as if he'd been shot. Clara continued in Arabic, her voice ringing with a conviction that Robert's numbers never could. "But we believe you are a man who understands the proverb, 'Build a well for your brother, and you will drink from it too.' Mr. Vance wants to build a canal, fast and shallow, to siphon profit. We want to build a well, deep and permanent, one that honors the partnerships, the land, and the people that make it possible." The silence that followed was absolute. Arthur Vance had gone completely white. He was staring at Finch, his mouth slightly open, the look of a man who had just watched his own execution. Alistair Finch didn't move for a full 5 seconds. He looked at Clara. The granite expression finally broke. It wasn't just a smile. It was a look of pure, unadulterated shock and profound respect. He leaned forward, and he replied in the exact same, cultured, perfect dialect. "Your father taught you well, Miss Reed. But that proverb, it's a very specific one. From the Badia. Where did a daughter of Beirut hear it?" "From my mother, sir," Clara replied in Arabic, her voice steady. She was a historian. She specialized in 19th century Levantine trade routes. Finch leaned back in his chair and let out a low, genuine laugh, a sound that seemed to shock his own VPs. He looked at Evelyn Shaw. "Ms. Shaw, your team is remarkable." He then turned his gaze to Arthur Vance. The smile was gone. The warmth was gone. His eyes were chips of ice. "Mr. Vance," Finch said, his voice a cold, perfect English. "Your presentation was adequate. Your numbers, as Ms. Reed noted, were inflated. And your assessment of me," he switched to that flawless, cutting Arabic, "was appallingly incorrect." He switched back to English, his voice like a gavel. You assumed I was an ignorant American. You assumed you were the only insider. You insulted me to my face, in a language you mangle like a drunken tourist. Ms. Reed, on the other hand, assumed I was a man of culture. She paid me the compliment of the truth. He stood up, signaling the end. Mr. Vance, you and your team may leave. Your proposal is rejected. Ms. Shaw, let's talk about the final details. The deal is yours. The aftermath was not just a ripple. It was a tidal wave. The deal with Alistair Finch was valued at over $10 billion. Losing it was a catastrophic blow to Vance Industries, but the way it was lost was the true execution. Alistair Finch was old school. He didn't leak the story to the press. He simply made 2 quiet phone calls to influential partners in New York and Dubai, recounting the entire astonishing incident, the story of Arthur Vance's hubris, of insulting both a client and a brilliant young analyst in clumsy Arabic, only to be checkmated by both, became the most valuable and devastating piece of gossip in the financial world. Headlines soon followed, as the why behind the lost deal became public. Billionaire's blunder, how arrogance cost $10 billion. Vance's secret weapon. Backfires. The waitress who took down an empire. Arthur Vance, a man who ruled by fear, discovered that loyalty built on intimidation evaporates at the first sign of weakness. His stock plummeted. The board, finally smelling blood in the water, launched a full-scale investigation into his aggressive accounting practices, things they had overlooked when he was making them rich. Mark and Sarah, his 2 sycophants, were the first to be fired, offered up as scapegoats. It didn't work. Within 6 months, Arthur Vance was forced out of his own company in disgrace, his empire crumbling, his reputation irrevocably destroyed. Back at Shaw Global, the mood was electric. They hadn't just won a contract, they had vanquished their most toxic competitor. The day after the meeting, Robert Stone, the numbers first chief of staff, walked to Clara's desk. He wasn't just holding a file, he was holding the signed preliminary contract. He looked, for the first time, humbled. "Clara," he said, his voice quiet, "I've been running financial models for 20 years. I can project risk, logistical chains, market saturation, everything. But I could never, in a million years, have modeled this." He tapped the contract. "I saw you as a soft skill hire, a risk Evelyn was taking. I was wrong. Completely, fundamentally wrong. What you did in that room, it wasn't a soft skill. It was the key variable. You didn't just win the deal, Clara. You opened up an entire continent for us in a way my spreadsheets never, ever could. I'm sorry I underestimated you." Clara looked up from her work, seeing the genuine respect in his eyes. "Thank you, Robert. We won as a team. Your numbers had to be solid, or my words would have been meaningless." He nodded, a new partnership dawning. Yes, we did." Later that afternoon, Evelyn Shaw called Clara into her corner office. The sun was streaming in, illuminating the park. "Alistair Finch sends his regards," Evelyn said, a rare, wide smile on her face. "He told me he knew your father in Beirut. He said David Reed was a man of unparalleled integrity and that he was a great loss. Then he said, 'Evelyn, it is clear the apple did not fall far from the tree.'" Clara's eyes filled with tears, and she didn't bother to wipe them away. That means more than the deal, Ms. Shaw." "I know," Evelyn said softly. "It's why this next step is so important. The junior analyst title is gone. I'm promoting you to Director of Mideast Strategy." Clara's breath caught. "Director? This deal isn't an ending, Clara. It's a beginning. It requires a permanent, high-level presence in the Gulf. I'm opening a new regional headquarters in Riyadh, and I want you to build it and run it. Me? In Riyadh? But my degree. You'll finish it online. You'll fly back for your final exams. Shore Global will pay for every cent. I'm not sending you to Riyadh because you speak Arabic, Clara. Though you'll find Mr. Finch has already told everyone in the Gulf about you. I'm sending you because you know when to listen and when to speak. You have what Arthur Vance, with all his billions, never will. Wisdom. You have grace under fire. I can't teach that. You've earned this. 6 months later, Clara stood in her own spacious office on the 30th floor of a glass tower in Riyadh. The design was her own, a fusion of sleek Western efficiency and warm, traditional Arab hospitality with comfortable seating areas for discussion. On her desk sat a framed photo of her parents, smiling on their balcony in Beirut. Next to it sat another, newer frame. It was her brother, Leo, waving from the steps of Georgetown's main hall. He was thriving, and on the wall, her own framed diploma, Clara Reed, Bachelor of Arts in International Relations, summa cum laude. She looked out the window at the sprawling, dynamic city. She thought for a moment of the cold alley, the smell of garbage, and the feeling of utter hopelessness as she'd cried on the curb. She thought of the starched apron and the sneer on Arthur Vance's face. The journey from that alley to this office hadn't been magic. It was a testament to the fact that integrity, intelligence, and dignity were currencies more powerful than any stock price. She had taken the very weapons used against her, her heritage, her language, her parents' legacy, and forged them into a new life. Her assistant's voice came over the intercom. "Ms. Reed, the delegation from Abu Dhabi is here for the 10 a.m. Clara straightened the jacket of her sharp suit. She walked to the door, a calm, confident smile on her face. She was no longer a victim of circumstance. She was Clara Reed, Director of Mideast Strategy. And she was just getting started. And that's the story of Clara Reed, a woman who proved that your worth isn't determined by your job title but by your character. In a single moment, she turned a vicious insult into the opportunity of a lifetime. Arthur Vance thought his power and his secret language made him untouchable. But he forgot one crucial rule. Never, ever underestimate the person pouring your wine. They might just be smarter, stronger, and more capable than you could ever imagine. What did you think of Clara's incredible comeback? Have you ever witnessed a moment where an arrogant person was put in their place? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story of justice and vindication, please show your support by hitting that like button, share it with your friends, and make sure you subscribe to the channel for more powerful stories just like this one. Thank you for listening.